My name is Samantha, and I've been married to my husband, Greg, for 8 years. If you had asked me before all of this happened, I would have told you that we had a strong marriage. We weren't perfect, no couple is, but I truly believed we had a deep understanding of each other. We had trust, laughter, and that kind of comfort where you never have to second-guess your place in someone's life. Greg was never the type to overreact. He was level-headed, logical, and not the kind of man to start fights over little things. That was one of the reasons I always felt safe with him. I never had to walk on eggshells or worry about saying the wrong thing. If something bothered him, he would talk about it, we'd discuss it, and then we'd move on. That's how it had always been. But one night, I said something that changed everything. Honestly, I never saw it coming. I had no idea, in that moment, that I had flipped a switch in him, that I had cracked something I didn't even realize was fragile. And from that night on, things were never the same. I'm telling you this story because, even now, I still can't fully explain how one comment had so much power. But it did. And if I had understood back then what I understand now, I never would have said it. It was a quiet evening. Greg and I had finished dinner, and instead of turning on the TV like we usually did, we decided to sit outside on the balcony. The air was cool, with just the right breeze, and the city lights flickered in the distance. It was peaceful, just the two of us, a couple of glasses of wine, and light conversation. I felt good, relaxed. A thought popped into my head, and I said it without thinking. I wasn't trying to start anything, and I definitely wasn't expecting what happened next. You know, I've always been curious about trying a black man. I said it playfully, even laughing a little as I leaned back in my chair. It was supposed to be one of those harmless comments couples joke about, like when Greg once mentioned he had a thing for redheads, or when I teased him about his crush on some actress. I expected him to roll his eyes, maybe throw back a sarcastic remark, or even turn it into a flirty conversation. But that didn't happen. Greg didn't laugh. Instead, he went completely still, like he was processing something heavy. That's when I felt the shift. Finally, he turned his head toward me, and when he spoke, his voice was calm.
Wow.
You really don't respect me, do you? The warmth of the evening disappeared in an instant. My smile faded. I hadn't expected that reaction, not even close. I opened my mouth to explain, to tell him it wasn't that serious, but I couldn't get the words out. Something about the way he looked at me made it clear that this wasn't something I could just laugh off. Then, without another word, Greg stood up. He left his half-finished drink on the table, turned around, and walked inside. Just like that. I sat there, staring at the glass he left behind, a sinking feeling growing in my chest. I had made a terrible mistake.
But I still didn't understand why.
It was just a comment, a thought, a fantasy. Didn't couples talk about these things? I kept telling myself he was just being sensitive, that he'd cool off by morning, and we'd laugh about it later. But when I got into bed that night, Greg was already on his side, his back turned to me. I reached out, lightly touching his shoulder, but he didn't respond. I decided to let it go. It's fine. He'll get over it. Except he didn't. Over the next few days, something changed. He wasn't outright angry. He wasn't yelling or picking fights. But he wasn't there. He stopped looking me in the eyes when we talked. Our conversations, which used to be full of playful teasing, became short and to the point. No warmth. No emotion. Just the bare minimum words exchanged between two people who used to be us. Then the distance got worse. Greg started working late. Later than usual. He had always been a hard worker, but now it felt like he was choosing to stay at the office instead of coming home. He'd walk through the door hours after dinner, mumble something about a long day, and go straight to the shower. No kiss. No hug. No "Hey, babe, how was your day?" And when he was home, it felt like he wasn't. He'd sit on the couch, glued to his phone, or pretend to watch TV, but I could tell his mind was somewhere else. The absence of touch was the hardest part. We had always been affectionate. Greg would pull me close while cooking, kiss my forehead in passing, rest his hand on my thigh while we watched movies.
But now?
Nothing. Not a single touch. At night, he slept stiffly on his side of the bed, as if an invisible wall separated us. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, debating whether to reach out, to say something. But fear held me back. Fear that if I pushed, he'd pull away even more. That's when the weight of my words finally sank in. I had never seen Greg act like this before. This wasn't some overreaction. This was something real. And deep down, a small, unsettling thought crept in. What if I actually broke something? A few days later, I decided to bring it up. I waited until we were alone in the kitchen after dinner, when he wasn't buried in his phone or pretending to be busy with work. I kept my voice light, careful, like I was stepping onto thin ice. Greg, I started, watching his face for any sign that he was open to a conversation. I think we should talk. He didn't even look up. He just kept rinsing his plate, his expression blank, like I wasn't even there. But I pushed forward. I wasn't saying I actually wanted to do anything. I continued. It was just a thought. You know, people talk about fantasies all the time. I thought we had that kind of relationship, where we could say things without it being a big deal. That got a reaction. He set his plate down, dried his hands, and finally turned to face me. For a second, I thought we might actually talk, that we could work through this like we always did. But instead, he just let out a slow breath, shook his head slightly, and said, I don't want to talk about it. That was it. Just complete shutdown. My face heated with frustration. Greg, come on. It was just a joke. A stupid joke. I said I don't want to talk about it. His tone was flat. Final. Then, he just walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, feeling small. And that was the moment I realized. This wasn't just some overreaction that would blow over in a few days. Greg was hurt. I knew that I had messed up. I had messed up, but I still didn't understand why it felt like everything between us was cracking apart over one sentence. I was desperate. Greg had barely spoken to me in days. And when he did, his words were short, clipped, like he was forcing himself to be civil. I tried to act normal, hoping that if I just gave it time, things would go back to the way they were. But it wasn't working. So, I did something I thought would help. I reached out to Mark, Greg's best friend. Mark had always been level-headed, the kind of guy who could talk Greg down when he was upset. If anyone could help me understand what was going on in his head, it was Mark. So I called him and asked if we could meet. We sat in a small coffee shop, and the moment I started explaining, I could see the shift in Mark's face. He listened, nodding, but when he finally spoke, his words hit me hard. You know, he said carefully, Greg's not the kind of guy who just gets over things like this. He sighed, rubbing his jaw, as if debating whether to say more. I get that you didn't mean any harm, but you just told your husband you want to sleep with another man. And not just any man, a black man. That hits different. I swallowed hard. But I didn't mean it like that. I was just talking. Mark shook his head. That's the problem. To you, it was just talk. To him, it's something he can't unhear. He hesitated before adding, and if he finds out you came to me about this, it's going to make it worse. I didn't want to believe that. Greg was mad, yes, but I figured he just needed to hear it from someone else, that I wasn't trying to hurt him, that this wasn't as big of a deal as he was making it. So, I thanked Mark for his advice, left the coffee shop, and convinced myself I had done the right thing. I couldn't have been more wrong. That evening, Greg came home late, just like he had been all week. I was sitting on the couch when he walked in, looking exhausted. I stood up, forcing a small smile, trying to ease the tension. Hey, I said softly. Can we talk? He sighed, rubbing his temples. Samantha, I told you I don't want to talk about it. I hesitated, then said, I spoke to Mark. His head snapped up so fast it startled me. You what? I didn't know what else to do. I thought maybe he could help. For a second, I thought he was going to yell. But he didn't. He just stared at me, his face unreadable, before shaking his head in disbelief. You told Mark? You told other people about this? Greg, it's not like that. He scoffed, stepping back like he couldn't even stand being near me. So now, not only do I have to deal with the fact that my wife fantasizes about being with another man, but I also have to wonder who else knows about it. I felt my stomach drop. Greg, it's just Mark. I needed advice. I didn't know how to fix this. He let out a bitter laugh. Fix this? Samantha, you didn't fix anything. You just made it worse. He shook his head as he turned and walked toward the door. Where are you going? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. He didn't even look back. I sat in the living room that night, staring at the front door, hoping and praying that Greg would walk back in. But the hours dragged on, and he didn't. The house felt different without him. The weight of what I had done settled in my chest like a rock, making it hard to breathe. I had messed up. I knew that. But had I really messed up this badly? I ran my hands through my hair, my mind racing. I had told Mark because I thought he could help, not because I wanted to embarrass Greg. But the look on Greg's face when he found out, it wasn't just anger. It was something worse. It was the look of a man who felt completely betrayed. And now I was sitting here alone, wondering if a single conversation had just ruined everything we had built over the last 8 years. Guilt hit me in waves. But right behind it was frustration. Why was he taking this so seriously? I hadn't cheated. I hadn't even planned to. It was just a thought, something that crossed my mind, something I said without thinking. Did one stupid comment really have the power to destroy our marriage? And if it did, what did that say about us? I grabbed my phone, opened our texts, and stared at the last message I had sent Greg. Please come home so we can talk. No response. No read receipt. Just silence. I thought about calling him, but my hands were shaking. And honestly, I was scared. Scared that he would pick up and tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. I wanted to fix this, but I had no idea how.
Who was I supposed to talk to now?
Mark was out of the question. My friends?
No.
They'd just tell me I did nothing wrong. My mom? No way. I wasn't about to open that can of worms. The one person I needed to talk to was Greg. But I had no idea if he was ever coming back. I leaned back against the couch, my heart pounding. The reality of it all hit me at once. What if this was it? What if I had just broken something I couldn't put back together? I closed my eyes and whispered the words out loud, as if saying them would make me understand them more. I never thought one careless sentence could change my entire marriage. And now I don't even know if I still have one. That night, Greg didn't come home. And for the first time, I realized I might have just pushed him too far. Final thoughts. Look, if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that some words can't be taken back. I thought I was just saying something harmless, just sharing a random thought. But I didn't think about how it would land. And that's the mistake I don't want anyone else to make. If you're in a relationship, be careful what you bring up, even if you think it's just casual conversation. Some things hit deeper than we realize. And once they're out there, you can't undo them. I'd love to hear what you all think. Have you ever said something you thought was no big deal, only to realize later that it completely changed the way someone saw you? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. I really want to hear different perspectives on this. And before you go, if you think someone else needs to hear this, share it with them. Maybe it'll help someone avoid making the same mistake I did. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.